The silence in the living room is deceptive. For decades, the hum of a plastic box beneath the television has been the heartbeat of digital entertainment. We measured progress by the size of the fans, the heat of the GPU, and the physical discs we once stacked on our shelves. But that era is quietly dying, and the catalyst isn't a more powerful console, but a $200 piece of plastic that many dismissed as a mere accessory. The PlayStation Portal arrived with a curious whimper, yet it represents the most radical shift in the industry since the move from 2D to 3D. It is not just a handheld device, it is the opening salvo in a war against local hardware limits. We are witnessing the beginning of the end for the console as we know it. Something is changing in gaming, and most players do not see the magnitude of it yet. In a few years, the heavy, expensive box sitting under your TV will be a relic of a bygone age, a curiosity for historians. Most of us are still tethered to the idea that power must reside within the device we hold or the machine we plug into the wall. We think in terms of local silicon, but the industry's giants, Sony, Microsoft, and Nvidia, have already moved past that limitation. They are leading a charge toward a total transformation where gaming hardware dissolves into AI-driven cloud services. This transition is happening right now, hidden behind the evolution of the PlayStation Portal and the invisible magic of AI upscaling. It is moving from our living rooms to anywhere with a signal, driven by a simple, harsh reality. Local silicon is hitting a thermal and financial wall that no home consumer can climb. Imagine an impossible reality where a modest handheld device can outperform a $3,000 liquid-cooled PC. To the traditionalists, this sounds like science fiction or a marketing lie. However, the math changes when the brain of the operation isn't in your hands. When the heavy lifting, the complex ray tracing, the massive texture streaming, and the physics calculations is handled by massive data centers powered by AI. The device in your hand only needs to be a window. This is the shift from processing to access. The PlayStation Portal is the first mass-market terminal designed for this world. While critics mocked its lack of local storage and its reliance on a stable connection, they missed the bigger picture. It was never meant to be a PSP2 or a Vita successor. It was a test of infrastructure, a probe into how much of the experience we are willing to outsource to the cloud. The tension is already palpable. On one side, we have the enthusiasts, the player who values the weight of a physical disc and the zero latency feel of local hardware. To them, the cloud is a threat to preservation. On the other side sits the modern player, a consumer who prioritizes the convenience of Netflix-style access. This conflict is the friction point of the next decade. Sony is navigating this by building a premium ecosystem that uses technologies like PSSR to bridge the quality gap, while Microsoft pushes an Xbox everywhere agenda that renders the hardware itself almost irrelevant. This shift is inevitable because we have reached a plateau. Moore's Law is no longer the reliable engine of progress it once was. Making chips smaller and more powerful is becoming exponentially more expensive and physically difficult due to heat management. If we want photorealistic lighting and complex AI-driven worlds, we can't keep putting that power into a small plastic box. The solution is to move the heat and the cost to a data center, where Nvidia's H100 chips can do the work of 1,000 consoles simultaneously. The PlayStation Portal was mocked at launch, but it was a Trojan horse for a future no one is ready for. It is the bridge between the world of physical ownership and a world where gaming is a ubiquitous, invisible service. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. This journey into the future of digital worlds is only just beginning. The console is no longer a box, it is an intelligence that lives everywhere at once. To understand why the PlayStation Portal is so significant, we must look back at the history of the console wars. For decades, the industry followed a predictable cycle. Every 6 or 7 years, a new plastic box would arrive with significantly more power than its predecessor. This was the era of the bit wars and the relentless pursuit of transistor density. From the jagged polygons of the mid-90s to the photorealistic environments of today, the goal remained the same: put more silicon under the television. However, that era of exponential growth has hit a massive invisible wall. We have reached a hardware plateau where the leaps in visual fidelity are no longer worth the massive increase in cost and power consumption. Moving from standard definition to high definition was a revolution, but moving from 4K to 8K offers diminishing returns that the human eye can barely perceive at typical viewing distances. The secret of the PlayStation Portal lies in its refusal to play that old game. Critics looked at its spec sheet and saw a device that could not even run a game locally, but Sony Sony was looking at something much more important: the data. The Portal is not a PSP2. It is a sophisticated terminal designed to test Sony's infrastructure for a post-console era. It is a tool for gathering intelligence on how home networks handle high-fidelity streams and how comfortable players are with a device that possesses no soul of its own. By decoupling the screen from the processor, Sony is preparing for a world where the brand PlayStation is no longer defined by a specific piece of hardware you own, but by the service you access. This is a survival strategy. The rising costs of semiconductor manufacturing are becoming unsustainable. As Moore's law, the observation that the number of transistors on a microchip doubles every 2 years, begins to fail. The price of high-end gaming is climbing out of reach for the average consumer. If we continue on the traditional path, a hypothetical PlayStation 6 or 7 would need to be a massive, power-hungry beast to provide a meaningful upgrade. It would require complex cooling solutions and a price tag that would make it a niche luxury item. The infrastructure gap has always been the primary barrier to solving this. We saw the collapse of Google Stadia, a project that had billions of dollars in backing but failed because the internet of 2019 was not ready for the demands of instantaneous gaming. Stadia suffered from the glass-to-glass latency problem, where the time it took for a button press to travel to a server and back to the screen was just long enough to feel wrong. But where Stadia relied on raw bandwidth and hope, the new era relies on artificial intelligence. The hardware shift is already visible if you compare the physical footprints of these machines. A PlayStation 5 is a heavy, heat-generating tower that requires dedicated space and airflow. In contrast, the PlayStation Portal is slim, cool to the touch, and portable. It offloads the heat and the noise to a machine miles away. This is the first step toward a total dissolution of the console. Imagine a future where the PlayStation brand lives as an app on your smart glasses or a tiny dongle behind your television. In this scenario, the console is not a box on your shelf. It is a slice of a massive NVIDIA-powered data center. The same H100 chips that are currently training the world's most advanced language models are also being repurposed to render virtual worlds. This centralized power allows for a level of fidelity that no home device could ever hope to match. Sony and Microsoft are no longer just fighting over who has the faster GPU, they are fighting over who has the better network and the smarter AI. This expansion toward a hardware-agnostic future is the end goal. However, moving gaming to the cloud has always faced a singular, devastating enemy that has killed every major project for the last decade. It is an enemy that physics dictates we cannot beat through speed alone. There is one massive problem that has killed every cloud project so far, a barrier of time and perception that seemed impossible to overcome, but AI solved it. The barrier that once stood as an immovable wall for cloud gaming was latency, the agonizing delay between a player's action and the reaction on the screen. Physics dictates that information can only travel so fast, even at the speed of light, and when that data has to travel from a handheld device to a server hundreds of miles away and back again, the feel of the game often breaks. This is where the true revolution begins, not in faster cables, but in the implementation of predictive input. This technology represents a fundamental shift in how games are processed. Instead of waiting for your command to reach the server, AI algorithms are now trained to anticipate your next move based on millions of hours of previous player data. If you are navigating a sharp corner in a high-speed racing game, the AI doesn't just wait for your steering input. It calculates the most likely trajectory and begins pre-rendering those specific frames in the cloud before you even commit. By the time your thumb actually completes the movement, the frame is already waiting to be displayed. It is a form of digital clairvoyance that effectively cheats the laws of physics, making a stream feel as responsive as a local machine. This predictive capability is coupled with the second pillar of the AI solution: sophisticated upscaling techniques like Sony's PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, or PSSR. For years, the industry struggled with the trade-off between image quality and streaming stability. Higher resolution meant more data, and more data meant more lag. PSSR, much like NVIDIA's DLSS, flips this script by using machine learning to reconstruct high-resolution images from lower-quality source files. In this new ecosystem, The data center might only need to transmit a relatively lightweight 1080p stream to your PlayStation Portal. Once that signal arrives, the dedicated AI silicon within the ecosystem analyzes the image, identifies edges, textures, and lighting patterns, and then intelligently paints in the missing pixels to present a crisp 4K quality image. This reduces the strain on your home internet while delivering a visual experience that rivals the most expensive local hardware. While the enthusiast might worry about the purity of a raw signal, this technology effectively masks the limitations of the network with the sheer brilliance of neural networks. The real power of this transition lies in the synergy between these AI models and the massive infrastructure of modern data centers. While the individual gamer is limited by the physical space and cooling capacity of a console in their living room, the cloud is essentially infinite. Companies like Nvidia are fueling this transition by deploying H100 Tensor Core GPUs into gaming-specific server clusters. These chips are capable of performing billions of calculations per second, allowing them to render complex environments and physics simulations that would cause a standard console to overheat and crash. In this environment, the game is no longer a static piece of software running on a single CPU. It is a distributed workload spread across a sea of silicon. This allows for levels of detail that were previously considered impossible, such as real-time ray tracing on every surface or thousands of independent objects interacting with realistic gravity and momentum. The contrast between this new reality and traditional local hardware is stark. A physical console is a depreciating asset. From the moment you take it out of the box, its power is fixed, and it begins the slow crawl toward obsolescence as newer, more demanding games are released. In the cloud AI model, the hardware is constantly being upgraded behind the scenes. Your experience improves as the data center evolves, without you ever having to buy a new box. This infinite scaling means the ceiling for what a game can be has been removed. We are moving away from the era of minimum system requirements and into an era of maximum creative potential, when the heavy lifting of rendering and logic is handled by a supercomputer in the cloud. The game developers are no longer fighting against the thermal limits of a plastic shell. They are free to build worlds of unprecedented scale. This shift is changing the very nature of what we consider a game. We are leaving the era of static, pre-recorded animations and moving into a world where everything is calculated in real time by an intelligence that never sleeps. If the hardware itself is moving to the cloud, it isn't just the graphics that will change. The core DNA of the experience is being rewritten. What happens to the games themselves when they are no longer bound by the limits of a disk or a hard drive? They are about to become something more than just entertainment. They are about to become living digital worlds. The death of the loading screen is far more than a simple convenience. It represents a fundamental shift in how the modern player interacts with their digital reality. For decades, the ritual of gaming was defined by waiting. You would wait for the console to boot, wait for the disc to be read, and eventually wait for massive 100-gigabyte updates to download and install. This friction acted as a persistent barrier between the human and the experience. But in this new AI-driven cloud landscapes, those barriers have been systematically dismantled. When the processing power is decentralized and the game exists in a state of perpetual readiness within the cloud, the transition from your physical world to the virtual one becomes instantaneous. You press a button on your PlayStation Portal and the game simply appears. There is no installation bar, no checking for updates loop, and no copying phase that consumes your entire evening. This immediacy changes your psychological relationship with gaming. It becomes as fluid and accessible as checking a social media feed or turning on a light switch. But this evolution extends far beyond the speed of access. It fundamentally alters what happens once you are inside the game world. We are entering an era of narrative AI where the characters you meet are no longer bound by the rigid, pre-written scripts of a development team. In the past, non-player characters, or NPCs, were essentially digital puppets. They had a set number of lines and a limited range of behaviors. If you spoke to them twice, they would repeat the same mechanical greeting. Today, through the integration of large language models similar to those powering the most advanced AI assistants, these characters are becoming sentient adjacent. They possess a digital memory. They can recognize your character's face, remember the choices you made 3 weeks ago, and react to your presence with a level of nuance that feels disturbingly human. If you treat a village elder with disrespect, the AI doesn't just trigger a negative reputation flag, it adapts the elder's future dialogue, tone, and willingness to help you based on an evolving understanding of your personality. The social fabric of the game becomes reactive. turning a solitary hobby into a deeply personal, lived experience that feels less like playing a game and more like inhabiting a society. This shift toward a more intelligent, responsive world is already reflected in the hard data. Over the last 24 months, there has been a massive surge in the adoption of remote play and dedicated handheld devices. Statistics indicate that players are increasingly moving away from the temple of the television and toward a more mobile, integrated lifestyle. Handheld usage has spiked by nearly 40% in some regions, proving that gamers value the ability to carry their high-fidelity worlds into different spaces, whether that is another room in the house or a different city entirely. As the platform becomes everywhere, gaming becomes less isolated. The modern player sees their gaming identity as a persistent digital presence that follows them, rather than a destination they must visit. This portability, enabled by the thin client nature of devices like the PlayStation Portal, is the bridge to a world where the distinction between a dedicated console and a mobile device vanishes. To visualize the sheer power of this AI-driven generation, imagine walking into a vast ancient forest. In traditional gaming, every tree and rock was a static asset designed years ago by an artist. In the future of generative gaming, the AI calculates the environment as you move through it. It generates the specific way sunlight filters through a canopy, the way moss grows on the north side of a trunk, and even the unique patterns of veins on a single falling leaf. This isn't just a random generation, it is a bespoke reality created in real time, unique to your specific session. No two players will ever see the exact same forest, because the AI is painting the world specifically for your eyes, using the infinite computational power of the cloud to bypass the memory limits that once restricted game designers. The world is no longer a set of files on a disk. It is a living, breathing hallucination maintained by a supercomputer. However, as the enthusiast might point out, this incredible power comes with a significant trade-off. We are moving into a world where the hardware is invisible and the media is intangible. When the console under your TV becomes a relic and your library exists only as a stream of data from a remote server, the concept of ownership begins to blur. You are no longer buying a product, you are subscribing to an experience. This transition grants us infinite power and instant access. But it also places the keys to our digital lives entirely in the hands of the corporations managing the servers. The question that looms over this beautiful AI-generated horizon is a heavy one. As the physical box disappears, who really owns your games when the console itself has vanished into the ether? As the digital horizon expands, the industry itself is fracturing into two distinct philosophies of power. On one side stands Sony, the architect of the premium ecosystem. Their strategy with the PlayStation Portal is precise. They want to keep you within the walls of their carefully curated garden by utilizing proprietary technology like PSSR and integrating the handheld into their infrastructure. Sony ensures that even when the physical console is hidden, the brand remains a tangible presence. Sony sells a lifestyle of prestige, where the handheld is a luxury extension of a home base. Across the battlefield, Microsoft is pursuing a different vision with their Xbox Everywhere initiative. For them, the hardware is a secondary concern, an optional gateway into a service. They envision a world where Xbox is not a box, but a software layer on your television and phone. This is a fundamental disagreement about where the soul of gaming resides. This corporate tug of war has ignited a fierce controversy striking at the heart of gaming culture, the slow death of physical media. For the enthusiasts, the shift toward an AI-managed, cloud-centric world is not an evolution, but a loss of digital sovereignty. The enthusiast values the weight of a disc in their hand and the guarantee that their library will remain playable decades from now, long after the original servers have been deactivated. To them, the cloud is a precarious rental agreement, a reality where you're merely licensed to view content that can be revoked by a remote administrator. They see the disappearance of local hardware as the final barrier to a total corporate monopoly over digital history. This perspective is rooted in a fear of a future where games become ghost software, existing only as long as they remain profitable for the provider, leaving no trace behind for the future. In stark contrast, the modern player views these concerns as relics of a cumbersome past. They represent a consumer base raised on the Netflix-style model of instant gratification and subscription access. For the modern player, the ability to jump between a high-fidelity experience on their phone during a commute and a cinematic display in their living room is the ultimate freedom. They do not want to manage a physical library or worry about hard drive space. They want a frictionless gateway to infinite content. The lower entry cost of a $200 device compared to a $500 console is a trade-off they are more than willing to accept. In their eyes, the cloud is the true democratization of the hobby, finally removing the hardware tax that has historically kept the highest-end gaming experiences behind a massive financial paywall. This convenience defines the new standard of modern digital consumption. While Sony and Microsoft dominate headlines, Nvidia looms in the shadow as a powerful kingmaker. Their GeForce Now service has provided the proof that the console is already just an app. By utilizing massive arrays of H100 chips, they can stream path-traced, ultra-high-definition graphics to a decade-old laptop, making the concept of a hardware generation obsolete. This reality is driving a massive economic shift that publishers are eager to embrace. From the perspective of a major studio, the cloud is the solution to their oldest problems. It eliminates the secondhand market where they see zero profit from resold games. It effectively kills piracy, as the game code never leaves the secure data center. For the publisher, every player becomes a direct, trackable subscriber, turning the volatile business of hit-and-miss releases into a steady, predictable stream of recurring revenue that ensures long-term corporate stability. The industry is moving toward a tipping point where the benefits of AI-enhanced cloud power will eventually become so immense that staying in the physical world will feel like choosing a horse and carriage over a supersonic jet engine. Yet, the question of what we lose in that transition remains heavy and unanswered for the global community of dedicated gamers. Are you ready to surrender the permanence of your physical discs in exchange for the infinite power of an AI-driven universe? Is the trade-off of digital ownership truly worth the promise of a glorious gaming world without any absolute physical limits? As the era of local silicon finally ends, please let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. The transition from local silicon to remote servers is merely the first stage of a much larger metamorphosis known as generative gaming. The PlayStation Portal, in its current form, serves as a window into existing libraries, but the next phase of this evolution involves games that do not exist in a static state. In the traditional model, a game is a finished product, a collection of pre-rendered assets and hard-coded scripts. However, as AI scaling reaches its true potential, we are moving toward a reality where the game environment is constructed in real time, specifically for the player. This is not the procedural generation of the past, which often felt repetitive and hollow. This is a sophisticated, AI-driven architecture where the game engine understands the player's intent and adjusts its own reality to provide a bespoke narrative and physical experience. This shift will fundamentally solve the industry's most pressing economic crisis, the ballooning development cycle. Currently, a flagship title from Sony or Microsoft can take nearly a decade to produce, requiring thousands of human hours to hand paint textures and sculpt 3D models. Generative AI allows these assets to be created on the fly based on player behavior. Instead of waiting years for a sequel, the game itself evolves daily. This represents a future where developers act more like world builders and prompt engineers, setting the initial parameters and laws of physics, while the AI manages the infinite details of the execution. The PlayStation Portal is the vanguard of this movement, proving that as long as the connection is stable, the actual complexity of the game being rendered is irrelevant to the device in your hands. The arrival of 6G connectivity will be the final piece of this technological puzzle. While 5G laid the groundwork, 6G promises the ultra-low latency and massive bandwidth required to make AI-driven compression truly invisible. Using these future networks, AI will be able to predict and render frames with such precision that the distinction between a local console and a remote server will vanish entirely. Nvidia is already pioneering this path with its advanced H100 and subsequent chips, which are designed to handle the heavy lifting of path tracing and neural rendering. These systems do not just draw pixels. They simulate the way light bounces off surfaces and the way gravity affects objects at a molecular level. We are approaching a matrix scenario where virtual worlds are indistinguishable from physical reality because the AI is simulating the very laws of nature in real time. This evolution also addresses a growing global concern: energy consumption. While the data centers required to power these AI worlds are massive and energy intensive, they are far more efficient than the alternative. Having 100 million high-powered consoles running in individual homes, each generating heat and requiring separate cooling systems, is an ecological and logistical nightmare. By centralizing the brain of the gaming experience in optimized data centers, companies like Sony and Microsoft can manage power consumption with industrial precision. This centralization allows for the removal of heat and noise from the living room, leaving the player with nothing but a silent, cool, and lightweight handheld like the PlayStation Portal. It is a move toward a more sustainable, albeit more centralized, form of entertainment. Ultimately, we are moving toward a one-console world, but it is not a console made of plastic and metal. It is a global network of code, a persistent digital intelligence that exists everywhere at once. In this future, the brand of the hardware becomes secondary to the quality of the AI service. The PlayStation Portal was mocked at its launch for being a screen with a controller, but that simplicity was its greatest strength. It was designed to strip away the clutter of the hardware era and prepare the audience for a time when the device is just a ghost, an invisible interface between the human mind and a living, breathing AI universe. As we look further into this horizon, the traditional boundaries of what constitutes a game begin to dissolve. When the world you inhabit in the digital space is being generated in real time, and the characters you interact with are powered by complex large language models that remember your history and emotions, the experience becomes less about winning a challenge and more about living a second life. The industry is standing at the edge of a revolution that will change how we perceive digital space, shifting from finite products to infinite experiences. We are moving toward a world where the hardware is gone and only the experience remains. But as this plastic-free future takes shape, it leaves us with one final, haunting realization about the nature of our digital reality. The PlayStation Portal was never meant to be a competitor to the Steam Deck or the Nintendo Switch in the traditional sense. It was the opening movement of a much larger symphony, a test of our collective willingness to finally let go of the physical box. By decoupling the visual interface from the internal processor, Sony effectively signaled the beginning of the end for the local silicon era. As we have seen throughout this evolution, the brain of the gaming experience is migrating away from the plastic shell sitting on a shelf and into the vast interconnected neural networks of the cloud. This is not a loss of power, but an immense expansion of it. AI acts as the vital bridge, using technologies like PSSR and predictive input to ensure that the experience remains seamless, even as the heavy computational lifting moves thousands of miles away to data centers packed with NVIDIA H100 chips. The transition we are witnessing is the total transformation of the console itself. It is no longer a static piece of hardware that begins to age the moment it leaves the factory floor. Instead, it has become a living, breathing service that evolves in real time. The intelligence behind the screen is the new motherboard. In this new paradigm, every pixel is a calculation performed by an AI that understands context, lighting, and physics better than any human programmer could manually code. We are moving away from the era of simply playing a game, a phrase that implies a finite interaction with a set of predetermined rules, toward a future where we inhabit a living AI world. These worlds are not just static playgrounds, they are digital ecosystems that grow, learn, and react to our presence with a realistic precision. For the modern player, this shift represents the ultimate liberation. The barriers to entry are falling. High-end gaming is no longer a luxury reserved for those who can afford expensive graphics cards or the latest console hardware. It is becoming a utility, like electricity, accessible on any screen, anywhere in the world. However, for the enthusiast, this remains a bittersweet evolution. The tactile satisfaction of a spinning disc, the security of physical ownership, and the independence of local hardware are being traded for the convenience and infinite scale of the cloud. It is a fundamental shift in the social contract between the creator and the player. We are trading our physical anchors for digital wings. When we look back at this decade, we will see the PlayStation Portal not as a failed handheld, but as the most honest piece of hardware ever released. It didn't pretend to be the source of the magic. It admitted that the magic was happening somewhere else. This honesty is what defines the next generation of play. The intelligence behind the screen is the new engine of creation. As we transition from finite, static products to infinite, generative experiences, we are witnessing the birth of a new medium entirely. It is a medium where the developer sets the initial conditions, but the AI manages the infinite complexity of the outcome. This is the promise of a world where every player's journey is unique, not because of a few branching dialogue choices, but because the world itself was built for them in that specific moment. This is the ultimate destination of the cloud-based, AI-driven future. The console isn't dying, it is ascending. It is shedding its physical form to become everything, everywhere, all at once. The PlayStation Portal was merely the first recognizable shape of this new ghost in the machine. In the coming years, we will see the brand of Sony or Microsoft become less about the plastic and more about the quality of the AI-driven reality they provide. This is the one console world, a global, invisible infrastructure that powers our imagination as 6G connectivity matures and generative AI begins to write the very stories we play. The distinction between a simulation and a lived experience will vanish entirely. We must eventually confront the final haunting question of this technological journey. When the line between the game and reality disappears, will you even know you are playing? Subscribe now to stay at the edge of the future. The revolution has already started and it is unstoppable.